The Tuning Fork, setting the tone for cultural activism through weekly encounters with cultural activists worldwide. Live on ICAI, Institute for Cultural Activism International. Today is our 21st show. 21st show. And it's really exciting to have George here. George, do we pronounce your name Quasha or Quasha?
Up to you. Quasha is how I pronounce it, but who knows?
Listen, I hope Tano is going to join us. I know Babette will be joining us shortly. She's doing something urgent in Holland. Thank you all. Thank you all for being part of this. And there's Mike Dickman and Vera Dickman. And
hi, good to see you again.
Great to see you too.
Wow. Our Dickman friends, I haven't seen my Dickman friends for years. My God.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
We were trying to count the years. Oh, forget it.
Amazing to see you.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Look forward to it.
Well, we're really lucky. We're really, really lucky. And it's a strange kind of luck because it's happening at a time that many people would consider a dark time, a negative time, you know, a pandemic, but we know that out of the negatives come lots of positives like cookies, you know, like
exactly.
Yeah. And also from negatives, like a photograph negative, a lot of positives. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit of a, you know, the kind of fun we like to have. But we are in this pandemic context still, and this is a kind of conversation space where all of us are really participating with George and Susan. They're up in, near Tivoli. What is your town called?
Barrytown.
That's up along the Hudson River. In fact, not a couple of hundred yards from the Hudson River. Emily and I are in Manhattan and Union Square. And well, it's needless to say, this is an international forum. So friends from around the world will join us as it's convenient and possible for them. The other night, oh, by the way, this is the Tuning Fork, in case anyone is on the wrong channel. You know, we get to tune in to this particular kind of sensation or area or field of concentration, and perhaps resonate together and perhaps resonate afterwards in a new way. And George, I feel like, you know, contact with you, your person, and Susan, and being in your home, for example, and being in contact with your work in so many nuanced ways also changes us. And there's Gary Hill coming in.
Wow.
Okay.
Hi, Gary.
Gary Hill, welcome to the Tuning Fork. And I believe Gary and George collaborated on quite a few things, particularly, isn't it? Art Is? George, is that correct?
Well, yeah, he was in Art Is, but many other things. We'll talk about collaboration as we get along here.
Just from a kind of ground zero level, George, the other night when Emily and I were visiting you last weekend upstate, you took Emily into a space and worked with her in some way. Is that a kind of axial experience in a way that you're similar way that you're working with your stones, for example?
Are you saying I turned Emily into a stone?
No, you turned her into fluid. She became more fluid through this contact, and so as I understand, this sort of space that you've been exploring, this kind of liminal space.
Yes.
Is there that tactile experience we can have in our bodies that you're sort of exploring also, and is that in some way a kind of manner of perceiving in some way, or immersing in your other experiences and works?
the hands-on aspect of it is actually fundamental to everything that I am and do. I think it's actually true. More people than one realizes that they actually think according to how their body tells them to think, but they don't know that, they don't experience that. So one of the goals of my work is to introduce that understanding, that aspect, that perspective, to inflect our thinking by the information that comes from the body. The axial space, just to sort of give you, a little basic statement, is the free space in any given moment. It's funny, it just comes to mind that William Blake said, there's a moment in every day that Satan cannot find. And for him, Satan was the limiter, the part of our minds that holds us from full participation in being.
So, for example,
Yeah.
Identity.
Well, identity is a concept. It comes from the word meaning the same. So if we have an identity, it basically implies that we have a concept of our sameness with our self, and that we have a view of what that means. Identity is a very dangerous and strange notion that we're kind of stuck with. I mean, I'm not pretending that we can get rid of it, but we can certainly be aware of the limitation of believing that identity actually is, because we're never the same as even ourselves. We are multiple beings within ourselves. We are interactive with the world. We're interdependent with all reality. We're continuously changing in interaction with the world. And so the idea of identity would have to be like a very, very fast lensed snapshot of the moment. The next moment, that identity is another identity, or it's an evolution of that identity. So my point is that we're a space of activity, and we're a space of interactivity in our being. So the axial event that occurred with Emily and with you on a previous occasion, if you recall,
Sure do.
is my making contact with the center of your being, which I define as the space previous to your identity, previous to your concept of yourself, and to the operative mechanisms by which you protect yourself and hold things out from being you. So we live in fear of being taken away from ourselves or being interacted with improperly. So we create a identity limit, a hard boundary, and we're, in current political situation, we're facing the perversion of that reality quite seriously, where men have acted improperly toward women because we live in a repressive zone. But that's a whole other question. And my point is that the axial state is the pure state before all of that occurs.
George?
Well, let me just finish with one thought. What we don't know is that state is available to us at all times. And what I try to impart to a person through the bodywork aspect of it is contact with that space is instantaneously available. It's something I got through decades of Tai Chi, decades of body work, formal body work with people, in which I learned to listen to the other person's body, mind, in such a way that I could make contact with it. And when I make contact with it, it says, I didn't remember that I was here. It comes out. It says, hello, thank you for seeing me. Now, this is all below the level of communication. The person doesn't really initially know that this is happening, but pretty soon it becomes quite clear that they're responding to an invitation to manifest a level of their own being that wasn't otherwise available.
Okay. George, a couple of things. You mentioned Blake and the sort of perception of the devil, so to speak, these limitations. And it seems to me as though you're working in this axial space in so many different manners and means of expression that it seems to pervade enough to make it observable, at least to me. And I wonder if that's valid. And also from a tactile point of view or a tangible point of view, are you referring to a kind of accessible physical intelligence that's non-conceptual, an intelligence that is without words? You know, this, and if that's the case, are you saying that the body is always in the present? The body is always in the here and now?
Well, first of all, it's sub-conceptual, it's subcognitive in the ordinary sense of cognitive, that we are cognitive about something, that something is so. Yes, it's always there. And the separation of body from mind, first of all, is itself a flawed concept. They're never separate.
And why? Why did this come about, this separation? By the way, who's controlling this? You know, where did that come from, that separation?
Well, I don't think it will benefit too much by speculating on how we got to the fucked up state that we're in. But that's a whole long story in itself.
No kid. Well, we have plenty of time. 52 minutes, I think, for a
Right. Well, back in the Garden of Eden,
tunnel.
I think one of the problems is that we have this concept of a beginning. We think that something happened in the beginning that has determined us forever. And in Judeo-Christian tradition, that shows up as you're born in sin and you've got to work your way back to sinlessness. So your life is spent in struggle. The Buddhist view and certain other views, even within Christianity, like with Meister Eckhart, hold the view that that's not the case. You have a primordial perfection that is the case, and that's distorted. So it's the idea that we have fallen from grace, the concept, the belief, the way of organizing the world around such a belief that puts us in the situation of being out of touch with our being. What we don't normally realize when we think these kinds of thoughts is that that's operative on the body level as well as the mind level. So you can approach it either way. Buddhism tends to be a bit mental.
When you talk about falling,
Yeah.
it seems as though falling is also in our context, like discovering.
Well, that's a particular, instance of falling, that when you fall down, you get a shock and you have an opportunity to discover something. If it falls too far, you die. If it's a short fall, you might wake up through it. But the fall that I was talking about is
Understood.
a primordial fall, and it did not occur.
So it's a perpetrated idea.
Yeah, like
One of Blake's devils.
we live inside the prison house of our beliefs and the prison house of language.
Okay, so Ron just brought up something.
Okay,
We live inside.
we have an important comment, a technical blip. Thank you for your patience, you guys up in where are they?
Barrytown.
Yeah.
June Fortes. At least
Yep.
the beautiful image of beautiful June Fortes is on the screen.
An avatar.
Talk about stability.
Yeah.
So I've interrupted you a few times, George, and thanks for your patience, but I'd like to create as many handles as we can to give people more opportunities to dialogue with you.
Yeah.
And I have a question from our friend Gaetano Maeda.
Oh, good.
And I mean, he could just as well ask this question, but for some reason, he's speaking through me.
Okay.
don't know.
Go ahead and channel Tano.
Yeah. So I understood from Tano that there's this, image of you always leaving your house with your Sony Handycam a few years ago, I suppose. And Tano said, well, George made us feel as though, we were being seen, like we experienced the being seen, through the presence of his camera. We don't know how George saw us. And perhaps what I think also perhaps curious what became of that material.
Well, Gosh, I don't know which particular material he'd be referring to.
Okay, hold on.
I mean, the big,
Tana, you can jump in with your audio if you want to. Tana's been following us on YouTube, by the way.
uh-huh.
It's kind of like industrial espionage, I think. Okay, he's leaving it up to us, I think.
Okay, so let me answer the best I can. Out of that project came what I call art is, poetry is, music is.
Pieces.
Pieces is another one, myth is another one. But the main ones is art, poetry, and music. And that's all online, as you know. And we'll show a little clip from Vito Acconci in a while about that. But that's a project in which I ask people to tell me what art is. Now, what Tana was referring to is probably just the fact that I videoed people in conversations. Chuck Stein, Charles Stein, and I have been recording ourselves and interacting with other people for decades. We have a huge archive of these interactions. As Gary Snyder once said to me, you're going to have to live either twice as long or only have half a life, because you're going to have to listen to all these tapes you've made of everybody take up the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, as you well know, you have so much footage that you never get around to actually hearing or looking or consulting again.
Yeah.
And with,
It's
in the
a
case of art is,
Becketterian experience.
right,
Perhaps last tape.
right. In the case of art is, I've filmed over 1,000 people in 11 countries. And that's a vast archive that I've only made about a third of the way through in terms of realizing final programs, which are on series that are on artisinternational.org.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and Gary Hill, who's here, we've certainly done a huge amount of this kind of work together, not the art is work, but a vast amount of recording our work together. There are three great collaborations that I can address. One is with Chuck Stein, Charles Stein, one is with Gary, and the most pervasive one, of course, is with Susan, which is now turned into a series that we're working on together all the time. And actually what I would like to be talking about is, since you're talking about cultural activism, and I don't particularly identify as a cultural activist, as you well know, but I believe that cultural activism is something that all art in certain sense is doing already, and that in a certain way we are doing it ourselves just by being human all the time. We are. Question is whether that becomes active or not, whether we actually contribute to the space of interaction with other beings in such a way that there is something more than what is already apparent on the surface can be experienced. In other words, we're always interactive, but how much of the time are we conscious of that? So to me, the ultimate cultural activism is, what can we do that brings to the surface the conscious dimension of possibility in our interactive nature? I'm focusing on the issue of like eco-proprioception, as you know, to talk about that.
Well, yeah, and Susan, also please, join us with your contributions to this as well, because you and George are collaborating now in what George is calling eco-proprioception. I'd love to know what that really means, and perhaps let people understand a little bit the body-mind intrinsic system of self-knowing in time and space. This sort of
right. Proprioception is a physiological system. We have a number of systems that make up our psychophysical being. We have the proprioceptive system is the one that, to put it in simple terms, is how we find our nose in the dark. You don't have to look at your hand as it comes. You don't have to use your eyes. You don't use other senses. Proprioceptive neuroreceptors are everywhere in the body, in high concentration in some places like the feet, because you have to balance very minute changes in the ground level in order to maintain your total balance. So proprioception is our self-knowing in relationship to time and space, how we navigate, how we are an upright being. We're not on all fours. They have a different kind of proprioception. So our proprioception is specific to us. you could not move 1 inch or be anywhere in time and space without your proprioceptive system. Eco-proprioception is a concept that I've built to recognize that proprioception is not limited to the physical body. It extends beyond us. We know a lot about how we are ourselves in relationship to others in time and space, all the time. So eco-proprioception, I say, is automatically there. To me, if from a Buddhist perspective, it's the physical manifestation of interdependence, interdependent origination.
Right.
Praticca samutpada is the technical Sanskrit term. That Buddhists claim that we are part of a network. We are interactive by nature, that we are born interactive. I say that that manifests on a physiological plane that can be actually studied and improved and become more conscious, so that our interactions with other beings become—
I'm listening to George.
Who, huh, what?
Oh, she's listening to George.
Who is that?
Somebody in the gallery.
Oh, okay.
You got to get used to this. They're like all over the place. She's
Okay.
listening to George. He's cooking in the kitchen.
That's a manifestation of our eco-proprioception right there.
It is. And it's on tape, recorded.
Hey, magic. We've proved it exists now.
So George, through you're saying contemplative practice, there's some way to access this sort of interstitial threshold where eco-proprioception is somehow accessed or made aware.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there are many ways that we do this. I mean, for me personally, the body work has been a kind of laboratory in which I study this process at very, very subtle levels. When I'm working with Chuck Stein or Gary Hill or Susan, I'm encountering otherness in a high intensity, high intelligence, high sensitivity, high intensity. So the eco-proprioceptive aspect of that becomes viewable, studyable, interactable, you know, in finer and finer ways. So my life over these many years has become devoted to the ways in which I can experience this and intensify my interaction with people and therefore with myself. So I am, as I show up in these processes of interaction. So in looking into the eyes of over 1,000 artists, poets, and composers, and so on, over a 19.5-year period that I've been doing this project, I have learned a great deal about how to listen to the minds of other beings. And this is a fantastic experience. My job in that moment is simply to bring out of them what is truest for them in the process of saying what it is they do. What is this thing that they do? So that's the kind of—
George, when you interview these people over nearly 20 years, do you feel that you're sort of joining them in some interstitial space, in some space that has this sort of liminal quality?
Yeah.
Where dialogue is almost, informed by some sublime kind of awareness?
Well, if I'm good at what I'm doing, I can attract both our minds to that space. Sometimes I'm better at it than other times. If I get the person to drop their ready-made concepts and actually enter into the thinking process of asking what it is they do in a way that's new to that moment, then we might enter into this magical space in which is co-creative and co-interactive. So I'm in favor of the notion of cultural interactivism, as I said to you.
Okay.
Co-interactivism.
And let's go into that. But perhaps you'd like to show us the example with Vito.
Yeah.
Is that a good opportunity to do that?
For 2 minutes, yeah.
Now, What do we need to do, Emily? Coach us. Or does Susan know what to do?
Oh, I have to turn my sound on. I'm turning my sound on. I turn my sound on. Okay,
Oh, there we go.
we'll have to stop making music. Okay, we've stopped making music.
And now
Okay,
Susan's
and I'm
screen
gonna share
sharing.
the screen.
Okay, and I'm gonna stand over here for 1 second.
Smell it, you possibly taste it. With art, the tradition is that the viewer is here and the art is there.
We hear him, we don't see him.
Is
You don't see
is
him?
always
We have to screen share.
one of just desire and hence frustration.
Yeah.
And art is probably kind of a moral position. You can't touch the art because art is more expensive than people. Art, I would say there have been a lot of nudges into that tradition of viewer stands here and artist stands there, including some of mine, including a lot of people's. But I think the condition is always one of a kind of frontality. I mean, no matter how many different kinds of art there's been, art remains a kind of visual category. I mean, art magazines can't show sound, for example. They can only show pictures. And as a visual medium, it stresses control, I think, because at least in Western culture, visual is a means of control. Once you can see someone, you now can handle someone, you now have control over that someone, you know that person doesn't have a gun. Same two people are close up when you can't see each other anymore. And other senses come in. Sound comes in, smell comes in, taste comes in. I wonder if art relies on the visual. Why does art remain, I think, a kind of object? Probably has to, because art isn't supposed to be inhabited.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, George. Sorry we had this technical glitch.
Okay,
When we run the final video after a few days, we'll include the full clip for posterity,
okay.
future scholars and adventurers.
Mhm.
So you obviously selected Vito's segment out of so many. What does this represent in the context that you're sharing with us?
Well, Vito's challenge to art is kind of provocative. So I thought that in the context of a program that, I mean, a concern that focuses on cultural activism, Vito would be one of those historical figures who you could say has been most provocative in his cultural activism. From one point of view, another. The later part of his career, he gave up what he considered art and took up architecture, as you know. And this was him at a very late stage, about 2 years before he died, where he was expressing. We were in his architectural office, actually, in Manhattan, well, actually in Brooklyn. And he was basically stating his position that art has created a separation between people and hasn't found a way of not being this museum reality that's separate. I don't think that's true, but let's say I think there are many artists who found a way around this enclosure of art and separation from people. And I think that's one of the major problems, one of the major issues of art. And I don't think that Vito stayed all that much in touch with it. This is about opinions. Art is not about opinions. It's not about telling us what art really is or isn't. It's about the state of discourse in which we raise questions that challenge the very possibility of having a finished view of what art is. I mean, to my mind, Vito's position is both challenging, interestingly challenging, and kind of off the mark a little bit, in that I don't think he is sympathetic enough to art anymore to have at that point to have a kind of view of it that I would like to hear, personally.
George, you also have this work that you've done with these rocks and balancing these very formidable objects in precarious balancing points, which also comes back to this sort of, in a way, doesn't it? This sort of liminal experience or sensitivity, sensitizing beyond our own physical beings. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's this object behind you, which somehow, maybe you can tell us about that, the image.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some relationship there. And what's that experience like? What state of being and body, mind, cognizance do you put yourself in when you're working with these materials?
Yeah, that's a nice question. When I'm working with the stones, I would never have worked with the stones in that way if two things hadn't happened. One, I had many years of doing Tai Chi, and particularly body work, extensions of Tai Chi, and the push hands martial art aspect of it, in which you try to be a neutral presence before aggressive action. So if someone's trying to push you over or attack you, and your idea is to ride that rather than oppose it. So it requires a sensitivity that allows you over time to overcome the notion that we are born with a fight or flight instinct that is absolutely necessary and always there. You actually leave that behind and you enter into a collaboration with your opponent, in which you, through sensitivity, maintain contact. Don't flee from him, don't attack him, but ride him in such a way that he cannot feel your existence. So I, at a certain point, said to myself, well, this applies to a lot more than a martial context. So I started doing it with people's bodies, that I took nervousness and various kinds of disorder in the body to be self-resistance. So I entered into the state of that body-mind with the intention of neutralizing their self-aggression, which tightness was a kind of self-aggression, holding back, holding in. And so I found that it worked. And because of that, I was able to relate that way to other things. And then one day, Chie Hasegawa, now Chie Hammonds, David Hammonds, one day balanced two stones with circles on them, and it was very, very rather precarious. And I looked at it, and I got a sensation that ran through my body, a little bit like a kind of 5-cent Kundalini. It went through my body very quickly. And from that moment on, I couldn't keep my hands off stones. And I was not a particularly stone-oriented person. Susan and Chie had a very profound and sensitive, beautiful relationship with stones. I had none. From that moment on, that changed, just having seen that precariousness. So I saw the power of entering into a precarious moment that transformed something in me. And from that, I spent a year balancing little stones on the table, just studying the properties of balance in my own body and how they interacted and all of that. And that suddenly moved to bigger stones. It became these huge ones. Susan will put one on the screen or something. Like
George, one of the distinguishing features of this method that you're employing seems to be that many people who balance stones, you see them all over the world, but yours seem to be distinctly different because you're looking for the most unlikely balance points.
Well, I think they are too. I'm not a big fan of stone balancing. It never interested me. It was only when I actually had this experience that I started working with it. I would say I'm probably more interested in the relationship between the stones as a living instance of interaction than with demonstrating that I have this great prowess to be able to balance stones. What I don't like about stone balancing, it puts a lot of attention on the acrobatics of the practitioner, and it makes me very uncomfortable. It also feels like it's invasive to the environment, all these stones balanced all over the place. And I just don't get into it that way. I'm interested in studying this property, and it produced a kind of visual access to the livingness of stone, which is paradoxical because we don't think of it that way. But I take interdependence to mean that all things are alive on some level. It's just not the forms of life that we recognize or that our sensory system is keyed to recognize.
Well, this is more and more an acknowledged fact that every particle of matter has its own experience, a measurable experience, and therefore every matter has consciousness.
Yeah, we can use that language. Yeah, we can use that language. Scientists don't use that language.
Oh, yes, they do.
Well, there's some.
I've been reading it, and it's very exciting because it's so accessible.
Very recent development.
Yeah, it's very recent, and it's really liberating.
It is liberating, yeah. But however, let's not say that we've gained all that much by it showing up in science, because this is not on one side of the science versus intuition or science versus art or any of those antinomies. We want to look at this as in a proprioceptive way. How is this kind of awareness an extension of how I can participate being? And when it gets to the social questions, I'd like to see some awareness of this kind of openness in thinking and interaction between beings show up in our thinking about larger problems. I mean, in the climate change situation, which is terribly pressing at all times to us now, we're responding rather primarily to the urgency of the situation, and our motivation is fear of the damage that's being done. And that kind of closes us down, or has the potential to close us down from really fresh thinking about these matters.
I got to ask you a question though, George. Do you believe that everyone is reacting with fear? Is everyone?
No, I think there's an undercurrent in fear in us that's fearful, and I think that the pandemic situation has enormously enhanced this. That we now have a palpable threat in just the other people around us, and it puts us in a very, very ambivalent relationship to the world. The climate change does too. I celebrate a very beautiful warm day in the middle of winter, and then I have to remember that this is also not such a good thing, but it feels great. You enjoy it. So the idea is not to invoke guilt or a sense of our inappropriateness only. I mean, we might have some of that because we are responsible for the environment. We need to register that we are responsible collectively and individually, and in very profound ways that don't show up in a politically charged argument about this or a socially charged argument about this.
So what would this sort of eco-proprioception look like on a social in a social space? What would that look like in your vision?
I don't have a vision of that as a concrete thing, and I actually think that would be the wrong way to go about it. In other words, utopianism is that tendency of mind to want to construct an alternative reality that is better than the one that we're in. And while such a reality certainly exists as a possibility, it doesn't arrive through our figuration of it as a concrete alternative. I mean, Marxism, I could call myself a Marxist in certain intrinsic understandings of Marx, but Marxism as a tool doesn't help my thinking very much in terms of the current situation. Certain principles in Marxism obviously are very powerful and valuable, but as soon as you get the ism onto it, you start to polarize people. And so the argument becomes who's on first and who's got the best argument, rather than somehow inculcating a level of further sensitivity in which we are more conscious, more awake, more sensitive to, well, each other. And is our work occupying a space that projects a state of awareness that can contribute to the other person's awakening? That would be the real cultural activism from my point of view.
Say it again, please.
If we can find a way through our work to awaken, not to shame, not to debate, not to make wrong, though there's plenty of making wrong to be done. And, and we've just been through a horrendous 4 years where every day we thought about making someone very, very wrong because they were very, very wrong. But I'm not sure we want to continue that modality. I mean, this country's in bad shape because of the polarization is simply impenetrable. And I recognize that, but it doesn't help that we become our enemy. It doesn't help that we embody the state of impenetrability. We need to become more open, more porous. How to do that is a very tough thing. It requires a certain degree of meditative interaction with others. You want to call it, or contemplative, however you want to define it. And I don't want to invoke the primacy of a meditative practice or a religious focus. And I'm certainly not promoting Buddhism. I don't believe in isms. Buddha was a certain individual who manifested a state of being that was very convincing, that it was quite different from what we had available otherwise.
But George, it sounds as though axialism might be a process rather than an answer. It may be a method.
Yeah, it makes me a little bit antsy to hear an ism.
I thought it might.
I'm not promoting axiality as a religion or a philosophy or something other people should even say or use. It's an instant. I chose a word that was outside of primary kinds of discourse around me in order to call attention to its difference. And I don't know how different, it certainly rhymes with many, many great ideas. It's not original through and through. I don't mean to say that, but the focus, the way that each mind takes a principle and works with it moves towards singularity, toward just this moment of awareness. And that's what we want to bring ourselves and beings to, so that the insight flares up inside us and we become the possibility of that moment rather than winning points for our philosophy. Yeah.
So beautiful, George.
Well,
I mean, I like this old idea that all roads lead to Rome. And, if that's Rome, then all roads lead out of Rome. Like your work with these techniques and materials is a way of generating and sharing and giving very tangible tools to develop this sort of intuitive flame of interconnectivity and correspondence, because we're all in correspondence with each other all the time if we know how to listen.
I think we have to give up the idea of mastery and enter into the space of continuous open possibility. We're very, very committed to beautiful works, great acts, consequential actions and events and thoughts. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in the sense that intrinsically, that's always going to be there. At the same time, we need to call some attention away from agency. Who did this and who's on top and whose great idea is this and whose great work. And that's very hard in the present context because the whole world is constructed around strong identity and strong signature products that have unique value in the marketplace. And that's how we think. We think that we have to be different. We are different and we have to be above others. What we'd like to find out is how can we embody a principle that is intrinsically commonly owned, a common property, that the experience of it awakens that in the other person. And I mean, when you think about your actual experience of art, if I look at a video, every first time I looked at a video by Gary, since he's here, I'll use him as an example. I got a thrill that was permanently consequential. Something changed in me. An early piece that he did right here in the house next to, when he was our tenant next door here, called Happenstance. It just changed something fundamental for me to see that. And he was appreciating poems that I was writing at that time. And so this was a kind of profound exchange. It was happening. And we never sat down and acknowledged it at the time. We were just who we were, and we were doing our own thing and kind of interacting. But in retrospect, it changed everything for me. And this is through a path of ecstasy, of joy, of bliss, if you like, of when something shows up inside you like that. And to me, that's the consequential stuff. Trauma can be consequential, obviously, too, but it doesn't tend to have the same
Trauma.
positive outcome.
Did you say trauma?
Yeah. I mean, many things change us, I'm saying, but some things we have the possibility, the power through our actions to create something that draws other beings to the possibility of being itself, so that something wakes up. And of course, we'll concretize that and turn it into a thing. And that's fine. It's like dinner's a thing. It's great. You eat it and it's gone.
Well, why don't you describe a little bit to us what your collaboration with Susan is like, and then maybe we can talk, if you don't mind, a little bit about preverbs.
Okay. Well, let me give you my examples of what I call axial language.
Oh, yeah.
What?
And Emily is saying, of course, if you want to share more visual material, like balancing stones or something that maybe.
Well, let's go to let's go. We don't have much time left, so let me.
Well, we have time.
Let me go to language. Axial language precedes, preverbs are a manifestation of what I call axial language. Axial language is language that creates an open space within its own understanding. So that rather than leaving it only with an idea, we may leave with an idea, but we have a process of engagement that continues in other things after we leave it. And that within itself, it doesn't simply clamp down into a new bon mot, another. It's anti-proverbial. Preverbs in axial language are anti-proverbial. Proverbs want to give us truth to live by. Preverbs in axial language want to take away the certainty that there's any such thing, and to create instead a process of living engagement with our own speaking, with our own language. Determines how we think once we use it. It tends to perpetuate certain patterns of thinking. So we want to undermine the patterns of thinking in such a way that we regenerate the language, not just take it away, not just make it mean. I mean, for instance, Barbara Kruger's language has a kind of joyous exposure of nonsense, of crazy stuff, but it doesn't, in my view, inspire us to engage language in a new and creative way. But anyway,
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
From a very accessible perspective.
Yeah.
If one wants to embark or inhabit this experience of generating language as you describe it,
Yeah.
what are we referencing? What do we reference to access that?
That's the problem, is that we are hung up on reference. We think we've got to know an object as though an object were stably there, but that's not how reality is. It's not there. So what do we have instead? Well, in a process of exchange of intimacy, for instance, with another person, none of the things that get said in the state of intimacy are concretized in themselves as such, but are part of a process of further engagement. They have an erotic continuance in them. They can also have a harshness that can be very powerful. Let me give you one of the early axial poems, Axial Language Acts. Susan's going to put it on the screen.
And George, while Susan is doing that, it reminds me all of a sudden of Jackie Bass wrote a book about Marcel Duchamp, in which we learn that Duchamp studied tantric yoga with a yogini in Vienna, and also that one of his principal preoccupations was ecstasy in the metaphor of the female orgasm.
Full screen.
What? What?
Is that working?
What did he say?
Did he hear that?
I don't know if he heard it.
Are you seeing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we see it.
We'll come back to your question.
Yeah. Perfect.
So put up another one.
Okay.
Because George, what happens when we read it?
Ask yourself that question.
Oh, I've heard that from spiritual teachers.
Whoops.
Oops.
Tenzin Palmo.
Oops.
What does it feel like to have a non-conceptual experience? Try it, you'll see.
I mean, you want a conceptual response to a non-conceptual experience.
Yeah.
I think that's the
No, I
paradox.
want to generate language through.
We're always trapped in that moment of attempting to project. Here we go. There's another one. Now, in a sense, this one does have a kind of philosophical orientation, in the sense that it's arguing, possibly from one point of view, that we think that doing things for the world, for others, is a self-sacrifice. But I'm embodying the notion here that things that are intrinsically realized for what they are truly for all being, and not just the things that we concoct as our great acts of charity for other people.
Have you heard what the Dalai Lama said when he was asked
Poetry.
who benefits from all these prayers you're doing for other people in the world? Do you know what the Dalai Lama said? He said, I benefit.
Yes. Leave it.
Yeah. These are so exquisite, George, and it feels as though we're like riding the waves of the subliminal somehow.
Art eats it. Just one more. So anyway, that's a little bit, a little tiny bit of the sort of the original axial language that preceded preverbs. But preverbs are sort of like that. They're extensions of the effort to say something that is true. But in the process of saying it, you realize that that truth is complex and has other sides. So that comes through the statement, the awareness of the possibility of the statement meaning more than one thing as it is being made. That consciousness in process is the thing that I'm hoping to embody as an energy state, so that language, we take language the way we would take anything visually. I mean, visual reality or things that are beautiful or whatever. Instead of thinking of a simple idea of prettiness, we discover a sublime beauty that is challenging to us and that is awakening to us and exciting to us, that excites the process of mind. And we try to live in that possibility that we are excitable beings. Poesis is excitable language. It's not exciting necessarily, it might be, but it shows that language is excitable and that mind is excitable.
I was excited to see Victoria Vesna, your new neighbor.
Oh, our new neighbor indeed.
Who just literally walked in her new house and turned on her old laptop and tuned into.
Literally just got the Wi-Fi installed like 5 minutes ago. And I'm wearing Tesla for you, Nikola Tesla for everybody.
Well, yeah. Well, a lot to be said about good timing. Well, now we were also going to ask you about your work. You and Susan together, you're collaborating for
Yeah.
many years, and now.
Susan, yeah, Susan, for the last couple of years, we've made our collaboration explicit in a certain way. Virtually daily, Susan sends me a photograph, which I have not seen and do not look at or open before the moment that I am sitting in the compositional mode. And things that I have written during the day in my notebook, things that have in her photograph, conspire to produce a unique moment that I try to be open inside of and allow language to occur. And one of these tends to happen every single day that I do that. It's like channeling that moment. And it reminds me that we go through life nostalgic for the present. Nostalgic for being able to be truly at home. Nostos comes from home, going home. And we're nostalgic for being fully embodied, fully present, fully alive, fully ourselves now. So much is happening. I've got to do this, I've got to do that now, are preoccupying me. To what extent can I be awake inside this moment? So I create these circumstances that are very challenging to me, where I can't bring any ready-made concept of what the whole situation is going to be. I haven't seen her photograph. Her photograph is chosen for whatever reason she chooses it, not for any one kind of reason. And I have to go there. Sometimes they're very annoying to me when I first look at them. And my discipline is to shut up and pay attention and listen and look. And sooner or later, it starts to take hold inside me, and it creates a discourse all its own. There's neither descriptive about it nor descriptive about my thoughts and ideas, but is a manifestation of the possibility of languaging inside that moment. So this has been going on for 2 years. We're now in the 13th series of 36 photographs and 36 poems. So that's hundreds that have happened. Almost, I would say probably it comes out to at least one every 2 or 3 days in the whole perspective. Probably one every 2 days. But even, you know.
I don't mean to be irreverent, but it reminds me of something very funny that Leonard Cohen said when he discovered that his manager had basically used all of his capital, his money, for her own adventures.
Right.
And he was in the process of suing her.
Mm-hmm.
And that he was doing an interview, he was being asked about this. And he said, well, you know, it required quite a lot of patience.
Mm.
And he said, I don't advise it as a spiritual exercise. But I think what you're exploring with Susan is an advisable exercise. And I ask you to perhaps tell us a little bit, just before we open up the space for other voices, what, if any, do you find is the correlation between this work that you're doing in cultural production and the inner work of contemplative movement, Tai Chi, exercises of, you know, the Buddhist tantric Dzogchen methods, for example, a correlation here? How is one informing the other and vice versa? And is that actually a type of practice?
Well, thank you for asking a simple question.
The best is always last, man.
What it comes down to, things done for themselves are the only things done for all. When one inhabits the truth of a moment for in itself, how it really is, that moment automatically includes the others, everything else, because it's only when we attempt to define the moment for our own gain, separate from others, that we're actually closed off from that possibility. So it's a kind of, to me, art is a spiritual discipline. I think that the proper practice of art is as powerful as any form of meditation, if it's understood in a way that allows us to experience our connectedness with things. And that's a very tough thing, because it's very, very hard not to be trying to perfect the thing you're doing. And I'm not saying you should, but perhaps we could try to optimize that rather than to perfect it. That is to say, work it as far as it is willing to go in its moment of manifestation. Then we let a lot of things off the hook of trying to prove themselves. You know, for me, anytime I find myself trying to represent my virtue, my whatever positive quality of myself, or defend myself, either way, I am no longer present to my own being or to anybody else's being. I'm only present to a concept of my being that I think I'm right, or I think I'm better, or I think I'm this, or I think of that. And it's kind of really, besides being incredibly boring, tiresome, it also is a downer. You don't feel good in those moments, but you're willing not to feel good, because this is a thing you want to achieve.
George, there is something addictive about it.
Yeah, very addictive. Yeah. In fact, it's the source of addiction. Being right and not being wrong, being on top and not being on the bottom, is probably the big source of addiction. How can I get out of the unbearable conflict that some of us inherit from our past, our environment, our past lives, or whatever it is, however it got here?
Yeah, and what does love have to do with it?
What's love got to do with it? Got to do with it. Everything.
Listen, thank you so much, George. I've been so selfish to interrupt you so frequently and to hog the, time with you. But I hope there's so many wonderful.
You are beautiful,
and-
John. You are beautiful. You've been beautiful. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
I keep trying to disappoint myself, and I keep fucking up.
Right. One time I called John Cage on the phone because we were doing a book of his, and I was very timid because I didn't want to interrupt him. And I said, John, this is George. I'm really sorry to interrupt you. And he said, oh, that's okay. That's what we do for each other.
Hopefully that's what cultural activism does.
Yes, yes, yes to that.
Now, there's so many great minds, and it's always a shame when we don't open the door up and invite conversation through this interstitial threshold. I suppose that by now we have some axial quality of experience tonight together, and that we can speak to each other in that space that you've tuned us into, George, on the tuning fork. So beautifully. Thank you very much. The floor is open for comments or questions or other excitement, technical problems, whatever you want to come up with. We've done our best. Unmute everyone. Absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone, for your very sublime attention.
Thank you for coming.
Ask a question.
Yeah.
I was wondering about proprioception and robots and artificial intelligence, and how that is beginning to play out in a somewhat scary way, but in a way it's playing out. Just in relationship to what you were talking about, with our, the body, mind, and all that, and what robots can already do is pretty astounding. In fact, not just thinking and beating chess machines, but actually dancing and moving around like dogs or whatever. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that out there.
Okay, can I answer just the way I think about that problem, that
Yeah.
issue, that question? As long as we're focused on performance as some form of definable excellence, then it's going to look like robots are taking up our space, or becoming us.
Yeah, I don't think though. I don't think it's necessarily limited to. I mean, it looks like that when you see robots on YouTube or the news. What they can do, but I think the subtlety of what you're speaking of, I think, is still possible without it having to do with proving something. Although that's kind of part of it, because it is a construction, it's a making, it's a creative thing.
It's a level of creative thing, but it's not sapience. It's not
maybe not.
It's not sentience. Sentience is biological. I mean,
but even the line between biological, these are getting smeared quite a bit of late.
I know, but that doesn't mean that it's really so. Just because we can no longer distinguish.
I'm just saying that, like 5 or 10 years ago, the same conversation, would be very different. And I would not have, then I wouldn't have expected to be open to the possibility in the same way that I think I am now, that I really don't know what the limit of artificial intelligence actually is. I don't think it's limit. I don't think it has a limit, actually.
But it is something other than sentience. It is something other than sapience. It's something other than being.
But
and the inability to distinguish those two things is the real difficulty we're in. Technology has dulled our belief, our acceptance, our belief in the uniqueness, the singularity of being.
But we are technology, so
I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, language is technology, and we are language. So,
and I say that language is not technology at all. Language is an extension of consciousness. It predates birth. Language is actually intrinsic to being.
Back in October, Godfrey Reggio, the filmmaker who worked with Philip Glass on Keanu Scozzi and the Scozzi trilogies, said that we have become not only consumers that are marketed to, but we have become commodity that has now been marketed through algorithms and such. And he did say that we are becoming technology. Remember he said that? Godfrey Reggio, please reference it in our archives. Dira Vickman had her hand up, excuse me, Gary, and also Susie Surik had a question to everyone. And Susie, I'm not sure if you felt your question was, responded to inherently, or if you'd like to say something else or re-ask your question on camera. So Vera, please, thank you.
John, thank you. Just picking up on the last thing you said, or what Gary was saying, maybe I'm taking it at an angle, but certainly I felt this evening I was a cyborg, really. And that was just with my cell phone and my charger on public transport, trying to connect to some Zoom thing that was going on in
With
a
some guy
parliament
called George
practices.
Quasha, yeah.
Not that one, but yeah, it was 1 hour out for that one. And I was thinking, really, I can't do anything without my wires, and even teaching a class without your computer charger, you can't do your Zoom thing and put people in groups and all that. And so one's got wires all over. And the next thing is going to be the wireless with, and next thing it's the implants, because we are cyborgs already.
Vera, it's really branché.
But what I wanted to say really,
Mike Dickman, get your face on the screen, man. We
Yeah,
only see half your face,
closer.
man.
Come
What the hell?
closer.
Yeah.
But what I
Talk
wanted
about
to say-
integrity.
What I wanted to say as well, and addressing Gary Hill, that I'm happy to see again, is the last exhibition of his I went to see. I still have the fire and the water in my bones, and that element. It was at the Grand Palais, I think, that an exhibition that you did that was just totally, totally amazing. I think it was the Grand Palais. For my mind, it was on the Champs-Élysées.
That would be Bill Viola.
Oh, that's it. So sorry, Gary, it wasn't you. Never mind.
No problem.
But just to say that the going towards the art and the artist, for me, really, I think it's really like going for that, being nostalgic for the present, and going towards the encounters that are going to open up that space of open possibility all the time, that are going to knock you off the logical axis and just put you in that space where everything is possible, and that magical space of transformation. And if I need to encounter art and artists all the time in my own way, in order to do that, that's where it happens. You could say it happens on my meditation cushion, but it kind of doesn't in the same way, because when I enter an artistic encounter, I'm allowing anything to happen in a very different way, and I'm allowing for transformation. I'm allowing for all possibilities. That's how I feel. And for me, art is necessary for that. It's necessary to actually find that space, to find that axial space, if I can call it that, based on what George was saying this evening and what you're saying. So it's necessary, and it's a form of balance to actually enter into, some kind of encounter with
Other people's art.
art.
Because
Perhaps-
Vera also makes her own art.
Yeah,
which
and
is
I make
which is
art with other people
different
too. We've got a whole project called Embracing the Unknown, which is about interacting and creating interactions for entering the unknown, and kind of enjoying releasing resistance against the unknown, and actually bringing the body into it. So in other words, using digital space, but enacting with each other in digital space, bringing in the unexpected and exploring that otherness that was mentioned earlier, the way in which when you interact, you said, even with each other, George and Susan, whatever, there will be a moment at which that otherness is inevitably experienced. And yeah, I've been experimenting with that. Maybe we could run a session with 6 European artists from different fields. We could run a tuning fork session with you all. It could be amazing. But yeah, I feel a real necessity to maintain balance by working with art. I don't know how else to put it. So it was interesting to hear tonight your responses in different ways to this. Yeah, I just wanted to make that, so it gives form of language to it, but I like the pre-verbal, the non, the anti-proverb as well. And I think William Kentridge, in some of his expressions, his three word, things that appear here and there, the 3 word lines and poems. Tessa has some at home. Safe space for stupidity is what he calls his workshop space, the Center for the Less Good Idea. It's a safe space for stupidity. But he has lots of 3-4 words that at the moment he's invited people to put them on billboards, to contribute them and put them on billboards, so that cars drive past and they see a sign like poetry sucks, the poison out of life, or art is not a fucking test. But these things are available on the streets, on the highways, not in private Zoom rooms,
We had that idea actually originally. We were going to hire a billboard, just never had the funds.
Yeah, right. But I mean, that's it, there's also that reaching out and just blowing other people off that space of, wow, hang on a second, where are we going here?
That's
Our
what
foot on the
music's about.
accelerator.
That's what creating music is about. Creating music.
Improv. Yeah.
Well, as you know, I mean, all I do is only improv, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So I never, Vera once said to me, how do you choose how you're going to start a program? I said, I have no fucking idea, man. I go up on the stage and I start playing something. Sometimes I've heard it before, and sometimes I never heard it before, and I have no idea where it's fucking going, and I just do it, and
Exactly.
and it never ends. It never
Exactly.
ends because it never began.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But that's the whole thing. You see, we're losing the ability to distinguish these profound states of being realizing itself in this moment spontaneously.
Yeah.
Because AI has become so subtle that it is hypnotic. You think that because you cannot distinguish it in a critical, logical, rational, perceptual way, that it's therefore no different. But that's an illusion, because the thing that we're talking about is actually from outside time.
Yeah.
Its source is outside time. When you're in a state of musical interaction like that, I also play what I call axial music, which is that music. We have a group called the Axial Band. And they're all great musicians. I'm not a great musician. The other ones are. And it's clear that we don't have to make any plans for each other.
Yeah.
Someone strikes a sound, and eco-proprioception, our proprioceptive systems go into this common point that is there amongst us.
Yeah.
And it's a space that belongs to none of us, but which we are attentive to, in which we are serving. We serve this.
So you don't own it. You don't own it. Yeah.
You don't own it. You enter into it like another place. And discovering this profound state is so subtle, so fine. When you do it all the time the way you do, or the things that I've gotten, somewhat able to do, you lose track of how profound it is, actually, how different it is from
precious.
Yeah, exactly. And so presence in this sense is very different from anything that technology touches. It's all display on the surface of being, but it doesn't access this atemporal soul level of being, or mind, deep mind level of being.
I beg your pardon, but Victoria would like to offer a comment, and I'm also reminded that how important it is to be raw and vulnerable, because that actually keeps us sort of in contact with everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Victoria, please. Thank you.
I mean, we're all present now, right? And we're all in different locations, and we're all part of the technology inside of the machine. And AI is part of what we're doing, and who knows who's surveilling us. And I just don't see it separate like that, George. And you know what I love is when I came in and you said the work you're doing with Susan is nostalgia for the present. And I thought, that's interesting, because I think of nostalgia as something that we're wishing for, but we are present. So it doesn't matter if it's Zoom, or if it's a dream, or if it's sleep, or if it's AI, or if it's robots. It's all our extension, right, of our consciousness.
This is a true thing. This is like saying riding in a great car, or even riding in or being in your body. While the body is inseparable from the mind, it's not the bottom line of what we are. It's in time. It's occurring in time. Biology is a temporal reality, but being is not.
But you're being in the Zoom right now.
That's right. But it's not the Zoom that's being.
No, who said?
That's what I mean. AI wants us to believe that the robot has being.
You know, I'm a little bit with Gary on that. I think I mean, I've been working with AI for 20 years now.
I mean, I don't know the answer. I
No,
just
I don't
bringing it up.
either. That's what I'm saying. I'm just, when I
Oh.
say that, when you said now, now I'm thinking, well, that's what you're saying. So we don't really know, but well, this is something's going on here where it's another, it's not just us. It's
subtle.
all different types of,
Yep.
I mean, you know,
for lack of a better word, intelligence, but it's another way of
it's in
thinking that's
everything has consciousness in that sense. I think that you could say that, but it's not consciousness itself.
well, of course not.
Yeah. That's the difference.
We
I think.
agree with that. of
Yeah.
course.
But it is fun to realize that this now, then, the other now of last week,
Other now.
that this now is all over the place at the same time right now. And if we
that's
just,
what Yogi Bear said.
what?
That's what Yogi Bear said. What time is it? You mean now?
That's I know. that I'm-
Basically, it's using Zoom and your headset and your charger and everything to get to that minute in every day that Satan can't find. You'll find it. Satan won't find it, but you'll find it. You'll go through all these Zoom things. You'll go where you have to go to find it.
What are we going to do? I had cataract surgery. If I didn't have cataract surgery, I couldn't see. I mean, everything would be triple. That would be kind of far out for a few minutes. But look, I got laser cataract surgery. I'm very grateful for that. And I actually have a piece of technology in my eye. 2 of them, actually. So, okay. So what? Okay.
No, I think another maybe subject that kind of will intersect this question or answer, depending on who you are. And that is the question of immortality, mortality, extensions of life. At what point, at some point in the world, there will be, half the people on Earth, and it will certainly be a very political one because it'll be who can afford it. But a number of people will have a life expectancy of 150, 200 years, and the other half of the people will still be around 100.
Right.
This creates 2 different species, whether they're conscious or not. At least, this is, but I think that this question of AI technology, I don't really put those things together. I mean, it's all technology, or we look at different things in, very focused ways. But anyway, I think those things are going to intersect in some way.
Well, they're going to intersect with the environment. The amount of energy that AI uses is devastating to the earth. It's absolutely devastating. And while we're zooming up in that direction, there's a refugee crisis related to the environment. There's people who don't even have clean water and are dying of hunger. So yes, it's a new thing has to emerge. The technology that's running AI and computers and clouds and the economic system that drives it is just, full on disaster, head on.
But are you saying that people, in terms of the whole, their living standard is not better than it was 100 years ago?
Well, if you're in Syria or in depths of Africa,
I'm saying the whole.
So.
Of course, but still.
No, it's definitely better, but it's a temporary thing. We're going into a really dangerous time for the planet. I'm thinking in planetary.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, no,
I think that same thought happens cyclically,
Well, I know I was looking at also, it goes even into the art world with the NFT and cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency and AI use huge amounts of energy. And if this is where we're moving, while already there's red flags with the environment, of the ecology of the planet, it's not the direction that's going to serve us well.
Forgive me for interrupting, but Babette from Amsterdam would like to join us. There you are, Babette. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, George. I just wanted to say hello. I'm so happy to see you.
You too.
And yeah, I had to, you know, I couldn't see you from the beginning, so I went in a little bit past half the time, I guess. I really enjoyed, you know, your talk about axial language, and I'm interested to hear you talk a little bit about what is for you any kind of meeting point between what you would call axial experience and your experience in practice.
In what?
In contemplation, in practice.
Well, I think they're inseparable. If I'm a practitioner of anything, I'm a practitioner of Dzogchen. And in Dzogchen, these things are non-separate. It's the state of mind under all circumstances, in any circumstances that one's working with. It's more than mindfulness. It's mindfulness, and underneath that, the attraction to a state of awareness that you cannot describe, but that which you cultivate when you touch it. After you make contact with it, you realize that it's something fundamentally different from anything else. And so you do your best to tweak your activities, to adjust your processes of life, to allow that to come in, to weave itself into the present moment. And you try not to lose that awareness while you're doing everything else. So then you cultivate activities which are friendlier to that state of mind, and reduce the ones that are, much as you can, that are not allowing you to inhabit it.
But integration.
Yeah, it's what Chogyal Namkhai Norbu used to call integration.
Integrating, yeah.
How do you integrate that awareness in every moment of consciousness? How does he? The great Dzogchen philosopher Herbert Gunther, we had the pleasure of studying with many years ago, used to say, enlightenment is really a state of stepped up awareness, stepped up intensity and awareness. And so we're living in a state of stepped down intensity. So the forms of intensity that we manage to bring about through our activity, when they're informed by the awareness of this quality of mind that we're talking about as awake mind, awake being, you work with that. So to me, I don't see a difference between any of these activities, actually.
Well, good for you. How would you say then it influences, or it gives you more space for, you know, being really integrated in Dzogchen mode, let's call it, in your daily life, the integration? How does it give you more space, or different kind of space, for actually creating, you know, the beautiful statements that I saw, the axial language, as you called it? Can you talk to that?
Well, it's very hard to talk to it, except to say that when you cultivate this kind of awareness, you invite your creative awareness to be active within it. You don't separate it. You don't see the separate. So I don't try to control what I do. I try to be the space in which it shows itself. And it feels like I'm channeling something, but I don't have the concept that I'm channeling it. I don't see it that way, but it feels like that. It feels other than me. I said, where did that come from? How did that happen? And that's where I live to the maximum degree possible in my life, in my, you know, I work in my art medium all the time. I'm writing throughout the day in the notebook, and I'm doing things of that sort, you know. So it's not separate from anything else. I find that the clearer my mind in a state of practice, the more spontaneously the work arises.
One of the things that Shempen Dewa Rinpoche said in an interview with me, which is online, he said that the Buddhist path eventually becomes pathless.
Well, I think that's a very mysterious statement. I've encountered it many times, and I'm not sure I know what it means, except my sense of it is that it's non-separate from everything else that you're doing. Pathless means
everything else is not else.
It's not else, yeah.
Everything is practice.
Or
rather, everything is the embodiment of practice.
Right, that special quality of awareness, you find it present in all sorts of ways that you couldn't have predicted.
Yeah, it's like
it's also like no big
not
deal.
chronological, like a not chronological like a path.
No, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Everything is actually the goal.
Yeah, yeah. It's not chronological. That's right.
Right. That was Patrul Rinpoche.
Yeah.
Patrul Rinpoche made a great statement. Somebody asked him, Rinpoche, do you meditate? He said, I never meditate, and I'm never separate from meditation. That's the goal, so to speak. You could say that's what pathlessness would really mean, I think.
Let's just see. One more comment. Gotta go. Thanks, Gary Hill. Folks, maybe would someone else like to add something or say goodnight, sing, or improv in some other way? Thanks, Susie, for being here, and Ron Smith and Tessa, and June and Tano, Dan Subikoff. Great to know you're here. And of course, Emily Harris, our producer and co-host, Vera and Mike, Victoria, our new neighbor, Roxanne. Yeah.
I want to say
Hi, Daniel.
thank you. I want to say thank you to all these people, and also just how great it is to see people that I haven't seen in a long time. Like Vera and Mike, that was such a pleasure to see you too.
And Steve.
And Steve.
Steve.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
Steve.
nice to see you both. So nice to see everyone.
I felt your presence the whole time. I haven't addressed you directly, but thank you.
It was the one thing that we all shared.
Yes.
You.
You.
Bullshit.
Emily.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, no.
Bye.
Okay, Emily decided, yes, we should sing. No, we shouldn't sing. Yes, we should sing. Happy trails to you.
Thank you, Gene Autry, and good night.
We're channeling.
Thank you all.
Next time it's you,
Good
Mike,
night. Thank you.
Babette. Wonderful to see you,
Thank
Babette.
you.
Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Thoughts and
Thanks, George, for
Bye-bye.
making this a great 21 and 21.
Yeah.
Now go back and see the poetry books that have yours and Gary's actually confusing with Bill, indeed. Never mind. It was the same period. It was that same period. Woodstock.
Well,
Okay.
Eco-proprioception, Vera.
Somehow. Okay.
It's
Thanks.
been beautiful.
Thanks,
A
George.
bientôt.
Lovely
See you
to
soon.
see you, George.
Bye, Mana.
Thanks,
Bye.
George. The Tuning Fork, setting the tone for cultural activism through weekly encounters with cultural activists worldwide. Live on ICAI, Institute for Cultural Activism International.